I'm Justin, and Sam.
Sam, nice to meet you. We both went to school together for music composition, so we're not. He's the only DAP student here. And we kind of developed a working relationship over the course of 4 years. I'm sure you guys get stuffed into your computer lab or something, and you get to talk about ideas, and that composers kind of have the same experience. We drink, go to the bar, shoot some pool, and
We should preface and say we both went to school for music.
yeah, we went to school. Yeah,
We've composition degrees, and so our background for both of us is in music composition. Both of us have kind of had different but related kind of accents of what we've pursued with that. But in terms of collaboration, in terms of sharing ideas, a lot of those were musical ideas, and a lot of them still are in our work. So that's kind of the occasion under which Sam and I met and started working together. And we had the opportunity to do a few pieces in Cincinnati, and then we, not too long after we started, met Eric. And then the three of us have been working together in earnest for the past 4 years or so as a collaborative.
I moved here 4 years ago, and that was when we kind of found Eric and started doing this stuff full time.
Or Eric found us too. Were you a senior when we met?
I was out of school at that point.
You were out of school, okay. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, so I graduated. My name's Eric. I can introduce myself really quick. Yeah, I went to DAP for architecture and graduated with a handful of folks out there actually. Class of 2013 in architecture. So we started. I met you guys I think in 2014.
Yeah.
That sound right?
Yep.
And now I'm out in Salt Lake City wrapping up my graduate degree, master's degree in architecture. Yeah.
Yeah, so we kind of have eclectic beginnings. We studied music composition, and a whole lot of things come along with that, including studying electronic music. So one of the early things that got us into doing interactive stuff was we had a teacher that had an ARP 2600. Does anybody know what that is? Just this big modular synthesizer board, and you plug chords from one oscillator into the other, and it makes weird sounds. And that was kind of early electronic music. Composers composed on big boards like that, because the only place you could afford them was at a university. And he was, he had been teaching there since the 60s, so that was our first electronic music class.
Yeah, and that definitely, since then, has kind of informed what we've been interested in doing. I think a lot of, like Ingrid mentioned earlier, a lot of our work is based in electronics in some way. And neither of us have any formal training in electronics, but both of us have kind of had a lot of desire to use electronics and tinker. And so that's been a big part of the work we do. Let's talk about, we have three kind of themes we wanted to relay that we think are important to the work we do. One is collaboration. I think that's key to everything we've done so far and to both of our practices individually. It's something that we definitely learned as musicians. In order to get pretty much any music played, you need to learn to collaborate with performers, and you need to learn how to have a relationship that's give and take. And so I think that kind of set us up to have those relationships with musicians, but also with people of a lot of different disciplines. There's two people in this room that we've collaborated with, Jeff Welch. We're going to be talking about one of the pieces that we've done together, and then Ingrid and the three of us have collaborated too. So yeah, collaboration. The second thing is endurance, which has played a big factor in all of our work. A lot of the things that we've come to as materials are things that we don't have a lot of experience with. And so they often require a lot of training and education that happens in a very practical way, which is we have something in mind that we need to build, and we have an idea of what it needs to be, but we don't really know how to get there. And so each of our installations, I think, is a process of us learning a new skill set, or really like diving into a skill set we are kind of only a little bit familiar with. And then the last one being kind of an eclectic amateurism, which I think fits in with how we acquire skill sets, is we've always been kind of willing to assume that we'll be able to get something out of just trying something new. And so we've gotten into electronics and sensors and interactive systems in a way that we had never intended to, just kind of naturally spiraled out. So we want to talk about those kind of three key themes and put them in the context of three pieces we did last year. So all the pieces we're going to show you images of were from last year. This was oscillators. This is the first piece that the three of us did together, and it is from 2014. We're not going to discuss it today, but that's what that image is. So From Any Point is our collaboration with Jeff Welch. It's currently at the Contemporary Arts Center, and it is a interactive array of nodes that communicate with their neighbors. Do you have that? Yeah, we pass that around. We're going to pass around this circuit. It's a little delicate, but Sam brought it because we wanted to show you. I think it kind of gets at the three themes. We didn't, when we set out to make this piece, know how to have boards fabricated, and since then have learned more about that, and we'll be developing that more in the future. But you know, what the piece ended up being was a big community project that was driven by a group of friends that were willing to spend a lot of weeknights soldering and assembling and trying to help us complete something that had a deadline. Yeah, what do you say about?
So the idea of the piece, like, we actually spent I think a good 5 months kind of planning. Was that maybe 3 months meeting with Jeff, you know, and drinking coffee, and trying to come up with this the concept for this, and that was kind of an interesting experience. We probably spent too much time doing that.
I think we had 10 meetings or something, and probably like 30, 40 different things that were either lightly or seriously entertained.
But yeah, it was kind of like a crystallization moment. We had been talking, what it started off as was talking about all of the things we thought we could do with sensors, and riffing off the things that Jeff could do with the plasma cutter and with geometry in
Rhino.
Yeah. And what we came to was the idea of creating, and it also came out of our kind of knowledge, musical history. So one of the big themes in a lot of our works are multi-point sound or multi-channel sound. The first installation we did was like a 12-channel sound system, which means not just that there are 12 speakers, but there's one, you can control a sound out of that speaker, you can put it out of this speaker. So most systems are stereo, and you can pan in kind of 2-dimensional space. You can move a sound from one speaker to the other. So we got really interested in thinking about ensembles and how they can be arranged in space, how a choir can surround an audience, and we applied that to speakers and electronic music in a way that kind of led to a lot of these ideas. So combining the sensors, combining the ability for each one to kind of be its own communicating processing unit and its own speaker. So whoever has that, it's got a tiny speaker in it. It also has a light sensor and a light emitter on each side. So what happens is when they're next to each other, and you shine a light on one from the bottom, it sends out a light pulse, and the one next to it measures how long that pulse was and relays it along the chain. So when you look at video of this, when a specific color spreads across the whole ceiling, that's because they're communicating a specific musical mode to each node. So there was a lot that kind of came into figuring out how that would work. But the idea came, talking to Jeff and thinking about how kind of a multiplicity of nodes could communicate in a larger structure.
Yeah, and Jeff has a lot of experience working with parametric design tools, and it was our first time working with somebody that had that experience. And so a lot of this was figuring out, how these shapes, because we had no idea, that they were going to end up as independent small nodes, but how the shapes that Jeff was able to create and model could really draw out a certain kind of music that was specific to the geometries that he was able to create. Eric, do you want to say anything about that collaborative process? Hello? Hello?
What?
Do you want to say, are you on Facebook?
Does he know he's been on for the last 15 minutes?
Do you want to talk about the collaborative process with Jeff at all?
Yeah, sure. This was kind of a funny project for me specifically because I was in on the initial conversations, kind of like the extended gestation process at the very beginning. In endless design meetings of just throwing ideas against a wall for hours. And so I think a lot of what happened there, especially between Jeff and I guess, being people with design backgrounds, I think a lot of it was with Jeff being the fabricator, understanding what our skill sets were, both us understanding what Jeff's skill sets were, and I think maybe explaining ours to him, specifically you guys, Justin and Sam, and allowing something new to emerge from those collaborations. But I think establishing that base between the two of us was that took a while. I don't know, it took a while,
Yeah.
Seemingly, but yeah. So I kind of stepped back because I ended up moving here, and Jeff I think kind of took the reins on the design side of things, the physical design side of things. So yeah, I don't know if Jeff is willing. Maybe Jeff could give a little bit of insight into that. I think you might have a little bit more, just because you took the thing through the end. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, no pressure.
No, it's fine. It was fascinating. You guys were amazing to work with because I'm used to kind of like trying to figure out a system or a thing that does something aesthetically, but this was totally different because this was a swarm, and it allowed us to kind of get into, well, it's kind of an aspect of parametricism that I wanted to get into during grad school here, but it's a little bit over my head. And that is like the nature of a swarm and of these individual brains talking to each other. So this allowed me, like through like talking with these guys and like seeing what they could do, or learning to understand what they could do. It was like just like eye-opening. Like ideas I've maybe thought would be cool to do for a while, but had no idea. And then these guys are like, oh yeah, we'll just like do a thing, and then we'll put a thing on it, and we'll put this other thing on there, and we'll talk to this thing. It was crazy, and it like made me. Had to work at a very high level, one of communicating, because they had all these very specific parameters with like what the cone of an LED light is, or a receiver, or a sensor, that I had to like design it within, so that the system has the parametric nature of it is fairly simple. It's just that there's an angle to every piece, so as you kind of assemble it, it takes on a bit of its own personality. But that angle had to be within the cone of operation of a standard LED.
We had to do a lot of tests,
Yeah,
and I had to like sit there with a table and then like move it around, be like, oh, it's still triggering it most of the time.
Yeah.
It's good. Like,
And then
and then send it
what's
back
the
to him.
tolerance? Yeah, like what's the range that's safe?
It was great though. It's like, it's working, to be able to work like that within real world parameters, it far exceeded any parameters I ever had. Usually it's like, is this gonna fall off the wall? That's important.
That still counts.
Still
Yeah,
important,
that's
still important.
Yeah.
Off the ceiling.
There were a lot of
So,
things
but
that
it
we
was,
did.
yeah, it was great, and these guys were really patient with me, you know, trying to figure everything out, but.
There was a lot that we didn't know if it was gonna work too, though. Like even up until the opening, we were like pulling those things down and popping the chips out and putting up a new one, because some of them, you know, we soldered them all by hand. So there were all kinds of electrical variations that made some not work exactly
I will never
the
forget.
same way.
I'll never forget that last half hour when there was probably about 100 people outside for the opening, and it's totally dark in there, and I'm like, I trusted you guys.
Yeah, but
like,
we were just putting the
figure it
finishing
out.
touches on it.
Figure it
It
out.
wasn't
It's
gonna
gonna do
work.
something, I guess. So, but it was amazing. It was like totally miraculous. It just worked. Like everything worked.
We had like a small chunk of that like up in the studio, you
Yeah.
know, like a month ahead of time and maybe a month ahead of time.
I would, yeah.
And so I would test it on a small scale and see if it had the behavior that I wanted, and just knew enough that when we got it to that scale, that behavior would spread across the whole ceiling.
I would say that we learned a lot about manufacturing, especially in that project. And I think that both ties into endurance and into kind of an eclectic amateurism. Is we went in thinking like, oh yeah, 200, that's not that many. But
Yeah,
then
it
each
was
of those
1,000. At first,
At first
yeah,
we wanted to
were
do
talking about
1,000,
1,000.
but you know, each of those has like 27 discrete steps of assembly, and they're not all the same process. It's not all soldering. Some of it's bending, and so you're really utilizing multiple tools and having to try to make a system out of that where you can create efficiencies was very difficult. And I think if we and when we hopefully are able to do a piece like this again in the future, we will have learned a lot that will allow us to make a lot more, but also make our lives better from time.
Yeah, there was no better motivation to learn a program called EaglePad. If you've ever heard of that, than that project. So you know, like turns out you can have 250 boards made for like $280.
Really?
Yeah. Sorry. Probably should have cut
It
that.
does include all the assembly, but
Oh,
it's
that's amazing.
the time, so we learned a lot for
Yeah.
sure.
But yeah, so you know, if you look at that board, you can kind of
So
see.
Eagle, they could have created boards like you created for $200.
Well, I think electronically, yes, it would have functioned, but I like to think, partially because I'm justifying after the fact, but I do think that there's something about not being tethered to a certain geometry of the board that allowed us to think about geometries that we might not have had we had gone with the manufactured approach. If we go with the manufactured approach, we'll be able to find manufacturers that can manufacture a triangular board or a hexagonal board. But you know, had we had initially approached that software, not having a ton of experience with it, we probably would have gone for squares. And I think the kind of piece we would have created would have been a lot different.
I see.
But yes.
So you
kind
could
of,
actually
yeah.
add to this piece with
Yeah.
these manufactured things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Expand it.
Yeah, we like to do some that are a much larger
Yeah.
scale, ideally. So I think that's enough on that piece.
That was our first big, like really large scale piece for an institution.
Our next large scale piece was a project that we did for the Eau Claire Music Festival, which is a 2-day music festival in Wisconsin, in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. It's run by Justin Vernon, who plays under the name Bon Iver, and Aaron Desner, and a light artist named Michael Brown, and a writer named Michael Perry. And the four of them, this was the third year that they had run the festival, but I think they've created a really interesting kind of music festival that, having gone to a few other summer festivals like Bonnaroo before, like it has a very different kind of vibe, I guess to say. So yeah, we sent in, we responded to an RFP with a proposal, and they sent us an email, an acceptance email back, and then 2 weeks after we had gotten that email, we had a conversation with Michael Brown, who runs the kind of the artist section of the festival, and he was like, hey, we really loved your proposal, but I already have like a square LED thing in the woods, which is kind of what we had pitched. So could you do your proposal from last year? Because we had submitted to the festival a year before. So we had 5 weeks from that point, 5 or 6 weeks maybe. And we kind of like in that hour and a half have to decide if we're gonna say yes to doing this piece that we had proposed a year prior. But after having done it, I think we learned a lot in that year between our first proposal we submitted and our second proposal. And so the first proposal we submitted, I think, had a lot of things that were challenging, and we decided to do it. The proposal was to create an array of fans in front of speakers that when sound was played through the speaker and the fan rotated at different speeds, increasing and decreasing, it would create kind of like a wah-wah effect or a muting effect. So like a wah-wah-wah, kind of like the, talking through a fan kind of thing. And so that was what we had proposed the year prior. So this piece that you see is the result of a lot of thinking, a lot of design work from Eric, considering in a very quick time frame how we were going to take what we proposed and kind of change it and make it this large structure that felt good for people to move through. Why don't you talk about you and Julia and like the collaboration on your end and just like what that process was?
Totally, yeah. So what we initially proposed the year prior was essentially 3 really boring walls of these fans, like in kind of cubicles stacked on top of each other that kind of created a space inside of them, or in between them rather. And I don't think any of us were really pumped about that idea. It was, so we ended up, we thought we were gonna be in the woods. We thought we were gonna be on one part of the festival grounds. And then it turns out, probably 4 weeks before the festival, they changed our location on the festival grounds. And so we kind of had to act really quickly and figure out a form that was both satisfying in response to the location on the festival grounds. So to kind of explain that really quick, this was kind of in the corner adjacent to a pretty heavy path of circulation, but it was a little bit off to the side of it. So what we were attempting to do was to kind of feed off of that and kind of funnel people through a new space that we were creating, and then it opens up to the south to the Chippewa River, which borders the festival grounds. And so it was going between kind of like the functionality, the spatial functionality of it, and also the functionality from a musical perspective as well. So musically, Justin and Sam can get into this in a second, but it was a spatialized sound piece that kind of envelops you. And so still trying to mediate between those 2 aspects and do it very quickly. So I was in Minneapolis all summer last year, and we had access to an incredible shop. It was like a makerspace type of thing that we built pretty much, or we fabricated essentially all of the pieces of this and then flat packed it into a truck and took a few trips between Minneapolis and Eau Claire and shipped it out and built this in a week. Yeah, I guess I can leave it at that unless Justin and Sam want me to talk about something specific. But
we needed way more time than a week. A week was crazy. I think this goes in kind of to the endurance, which is why Eric inserted these pictures in there. So that's me and Sam in the back of a trailer, doing some soldering and like kind of crucial connection making that needed to happen yet. And on the right side, you can kind of see how the fans are distributed through the structure. So there's 8 of them that wrap around each of those individual structures. So I think this was another big push for us. It took a lot of endurance. We had a compressed timeline to start with, and we really didn't want to decrease the scale of our piece because we didn't really know or feel that it would work at a smaller scale as well as it did at a large scale. So we went ahead, and it was difficult. Like Eric said, it was a week, and we camped on the grounds pretty much the entire time. They do give you a hotel eventually, and we all got showers, which was really nice. But really, it was like there was a lot of building that happened in a very condensed period of time while all these musical elements were coming together. They had an amazing group of volunteers, so we had probably like at certain times 10 people assisting us, which we could not have done without their support. So quick aside, if any of you are interested in submitting to a music festival, definitely submit to Eau Claire. I know their RFP is due, I think, in the beginning of March. But having worked with them, I think you know, they're like really committed and they really want the artists to be able to see their piece fulfilled in the way that they want. Very supportive group.
And all the other, there was a lot of awesome art there too. There was another one of the groups had built a drum machine out of falling water, and there was a whole like living room in the forest. So it was a great time.
Yeah.
If we had the time to and stamina to enjoy it.
Yeah.
The last couple days were cool, but the
Really
week
nice.
up to it was just like raining and windy, and we were soldering and stripping while you're in our tents.
And they hadn't like totally bug sprayed the area that our piece was in, and so we were
Still-
really like, it was kind of like a light marshland kind of experience. This is just to add perspective to this project. It's very hard for me to separate the experience of making this project from what it actually is as a finished piece. Sometimes I still think back about this project and feel grateful for like my cozy chair and my shower and things. So yeah, I think that kind of hits everything about this. You want to say anything else, Eric or Sam?
I think. Oh.
Oh, we can talk about music.
Yeah, I think we should talk about the music, specifically the collaborative element of it with the Cincinnati musicians that we sampled. I think that was a huge part of it.
Yeah. So again, with back to kind of having an ensemble of different instrumental colors separated in space. What we did was we sampled a violinist, we sampled a cellist, we sampled cello, we sampled flute, clarinet, voice, a couple different singers. And what we did was we spatialized them in each of the columns, so as you walked through it, you could hear the ensemble kind of shifting from one end to the other. And we also, and again, you could pan, so we could take the cello and pan it from one side to the other while you were standing there, so you could hear it moving.
It's an interesting part because Sam and I, you know, we're coming from this musical side of things. Like we heard Jeff talk a little bit about parametricism and the way he was thinking about that piece, but Sam and I are thinking like this is a giant canon. You know, we're thinking in parallel, not necessarily in contrast to the way that the design is informing the structure. And so with this piece, I think a lot of the kind of musical decisions we were making came from these samples that we collected, but also from kind of getting the feedback from Eric's design of the space and how there were certain areas that were opening up and wrapping.
Can we hear it?
We don't have a clip of this, unfortunately. There is a clip on our website. We can pull it up during the Q&A.
That's the other thing that we have learned over time is that not only do you build shipping and stuff into the budget. You should also
Good
build
idea.
having somebody that takes good video and takes
Yeah.
good audio. We paid somebody there that said they'd be able to handle it, and it just ended up not being that
They
great.
really turn out. We do have some video and we have some audio, but it's another lesson learned. But
You
those
wanna move
things.
on?
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
move on. Here's the finished structure.
What was the budget?
What was the budget?
Yeah.
It was 10,000. And we paid a friend of ours that is a carpenter, and we paid another architect designer, Julia, that came out, and Julia, Eric, and Tyler built the entire structure, and Sam and I, and we paid all the musicians. The musicians got paid. Yeah, there was a lot to fit into that $10,000 project.
Yeah, we didn't make that much money.
No. So the
Anyways.
the next piece is
Move on.
Zeitgeber. This is a piece we did last summer with the Price Hill Community Creative Festival, which is put on by My Cincinnati. They're an amazing organization in Price Hill. They have a youth orchestra where musicians come. They have access to lessons. They have access to string instruments primarily, but also guitars, and they're kind of growing into percussion ensemble and other things. And they do some really incredible work. It's led by a local musician named Eddie Kwan. If you don't know his work, he's a great person and just a wonderful advocate and a great artist.
You want to talk about endurance, man? Like, I think every single one of them was just like had no sleep like the entire 3 weeks.
Yeah. The festival it's like a huge labor of love that happens, and there's actually a call for artists for this coming summer as well that I think is another month on the RFP.
It's like mid-March.
Yeah, mid-March. So if you're interested in it, I really cannot say enough nice things about Eddie and My Cincinnati. So the piece that we created was called Zeitgeber. The Zeitgeber is an environmental cue that indicates a sense of time to your body. So the most obvious or important Zeitgeber is the sun, and there's a biological response we have to the light of the sun. And so that kind of response, the biological response to light, was the kind of central idea of the piece. There were 7 musicians that we had in a circle playing around these cylindrical shaded lights that each of them were watching in tandem with their score. And as the light changed, they were asked to change to different musical timbres and kind of respond in different ways to the light.
So the light was the score.
Yeah, the light was.
We had a score, but the light was what was kind of the conductor.
Yeah.
Giving them the musical material to play.
Yeah, the score is just a set of instructions, and so like they each learned those instructions, and then we would practice what we framed as games, where they're responding to lights, kind of in a way that's not super serious. So that's what it on the right looked like from a high vantage. Collaboration-wise, it was the first time we had worked with a group of children which have like amazing gifts and amazing talents, but like a very different sense of focus in some ways. No kids, right?
Yeah. Imagine a group of kids that can break off into Mozart,
Yeah.
string quartet.
We would like one thing. So there were a lot of challenges with this piece, and one of them was just like kind of trying to show them what we found interesting about what they were doing. So there were things happening with the ensemble where one light would change, and then another light would change, and then another would change, and that required them to kind of hold their note with a certain intensity until their light changed. And, you know, to us as composers and people that love music and listen to music, like, it's really obvious to us what's beautiful about the extension of those notes and kind of how they're terracing over one another. But to a kid, you know, it's like, I've been doing this for 5 seconds, I'm bored. And so, you know, we had students that were, you know, incredibly talented young students that would just kind of like bust out a little bit of Mozart because, you know, they were just kind of like tired of playing the same note. And so it really challenged us as collaborators to really kind of understand the place that they were gonna have an inlet to the ideas that we wanted to convey with the piece. And I think we learned a lot, and I think by the end, we had like a great rapport and great kind of understanding of what they were interested in and what we could give them and what kind of sounds we could expect back. Endurance-wise, 2 weeks of daily music lessons with kids. We should pay every teacher in the world twice of what they're paid right now. That's probably a pretty popular thing to say in the university, but it's challenging, again, that sense of focus and like accomplishing things in this 2-hour block that we had really took a lot of planning, lesson planning in a way that we usually don't have to lesson plan with ensembles.
It's the other side of the tech. When you design an installation that's all speakers, they just, you know, do what you program it to do. It's totally all on you. And then when you have to deal with an ensemble, you know, a lot of times they disagree with you.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to learn how to, like, you know, not respond to that and do kind of go along with what it takes to make it come together.
Yeah, or respond to it and change our, you know, way of expressing it, or change the idea entirely.
Which we did. We
Which
actually,
we did.
yeah, we wrote a couple new things, you know, between rehearsals, which you're not supposed to do. But in this
It's not ideal,
in this
but-
context, it was kind of half improv, half. They had modules of sounds that they could learn, and then they would listen to each other to make the group musical.
Yeah, and once we had gotten through the first 2 or 3 pieces, we were like, okay, maybe we need to adjust some things in these latter pieces and kind of figure out ways to get the sounds we want and change the rules. Eric, I wrote on my little page that I've been ignoring, this is what I called it as a joke. So Eric was in town for the 3 weeks of the festival. And I called it the 3 weeks, $100 in Tomato Cage Reality Show Design Challenge, because we had to spend $500 of our $700 budget on the lights. And so we were like, design something really, really beautiful. You have $150 in 3 weeks. And I think what Eric developed and what he came up with and was able to fabricate in that amount of time was really beautiful. Do you want to talk a little bit about that process, Eric?
Sure. Yeah, we had, thankfully we had access to a friend's shop down in Northside, and yeah, those were the tools that I had access to, or that we had access to, because I was kind of making my way back to Salt Lake for this semester, and just happened to be able to stop in for those 3 weeks and do this project. So there were a fair amount of limitations in that way, but we were able to work around it. I think it pushed our, I don't know, capacity a little bit, my capacity a little bit. I think all 3 of us were pretty strange, but it was really fun. For one thing, you know, designing these light fixtures, that was a fun thing in and of itself, but also my side of interacting with the kids, I was helping with the score, like visually what the score was gonna look like. And that was something I don't know that any of us had really thought about up until you know, when we were gonna do this, I think maybe Justin and Sam, you guys had ideas of what the music was gonna sound like and how it was gonna be performed. But I think handing like weird handwritten score with all these symbols and things that kids had never seen before, which is what it ended up being like. I don't know, that was a fun challenge as well, trying to like translate what Justin and Sam were doing into something that coordinated with the lights and the colors and all these things. So I was kind of a liaison in that way, helping to translate their ideas. But I don't know, we used, for the light fixture itself, we used tomato cages as the structure, which I hate tomato cages now, and understand that they're like all over the place.
Yeah,
From a
they don't
fabrication
they don't
standpoint,
manufacture them
none
with
of them
rigor
are the same.
anymore. They're just
So
like,
that was
you know.
fun. But I don't know. I don't really know what to say necessarily. Sorry. Other than it was a great challenge, and it turned out really beautifully. I had to teach myself or reteach myself how to use a sewing machine, and I don't know. It was
Chase,
great.
you asked a
It
question
was,
about fabric.
It was about-
again,
it was about
leaning on
fabric.
a lot of our friends for support. For instance, our friend Lisa reteaching me how to use a sewing machine, her sewing machine, and just like and having access to those tools, and a place to stay for me. I think that's one of many common themes is our reliance, not only in collaboration, but in the support of the Cincinnati community and our friends. We've been really, really lucky on a lot of fronts in that way. So